What's up, guys? Keeping on my promises of keeping these videos up. So today I want to talk about a topic that I get asked a lot about, even though I've kind of covered it a lot, but I'll address it again, which is intermittent fasting. So I did an interview years back on Sohee Lee's website about intermittent fasting, and it really angered the Church of Intermittent Fasting. But if you actually go and read the interview, it really is not inflammatory at all towards intermittent fasting. I think in terms of meal frequency and fat loss, well, first off, I guess let's talk about what intermittent fasting is for those guys who aren't familiar with it. So intermittent fasting is the idea that you can kind of improve your insulin sensitivity, cellular regeneration, all these sorts of things by fasting for a certain period of time during the day, and then consuming all your calories in a shorter period of time. And typically, I'm not an intermittent fasting expert in terms of the way people do it, but what I've heard is 16 hours fast followed by 8 hours of feeding. Now, in terms of fat loss, there is zero evidence that meal frequency makes a difference. So if you like eating this way, if it allows you to have better adherence, to more effectively create a caloric deficit, then it's completely reasonable to eat this way. And for some people, it's just easier. They use it to create a calorie deficit. They don't like tracking. This way, they can kind of create a calorie deficit. They don't have to really track. They just have normal meals. So they're obviously cutting calories because they're having less meals. However, some people who don't regulate their appetite well, they can easily overeat in 8 hours. In fact, I've seen people who could overeat their daily calories in less than an hour. So I think it's kind of dangerous for people who have had eating disorders, because now any diet program can be done incorrectly if somebody has an eating disorder, because they can take anything, like say if it fits your macros, and they can basically become obsessive with it, and it can be unhealthy. But what I've seen from people who have eating disorders who do intermittent fasting is usually they end up fasting and they'll overeat during the feeding period, and so they end up shortening those feeding periods. They lengthen the fasting periods so they can binge harder during that feeding period, and that's a dangerous thing. So I think as long as somebody can do it and it's a healthy outcome, I'm okay with that. So yeah, that's just one aspect that's important to keep in mind. In terms of physiologically though, fat loss, no difference. Now, that being said, it also doesn't mean it's a magic fat loss bullet. There's no evidence that intermittent fasting, if calories are equated, is better for fat loss. And I think that all the evidence would say that it's not better for fat loss. However, it may be better for you if you're better able to adhere to it, you enjoy that more, and you're better able to create a caloric deficit. So again, physiologically it may not be better, but it doesn't mean it's not better for you. Now, what are the downsides of intermittent fasting? Well, a lot of people have trouble fasting for 16 hours or 20 hours or whatever it is. So that's a downside. 2, is it optimal for anabolism? I think the weight of the evidence would say that you can, and people will show pictures of these guys who do intermittent fasting and have built impressive physiques, and they'll say, well, see, you can still build muscle. Well, sure you can. You can build muscle on a crappy training routine, and people who are genetically gifted will have a lot of muscle. It doesn't mean it's optimal. Now, if being as big and strong as humanly possible is not your goal, then again, maybe that's fine. And again, if you can be more adherent to it, maybe it's still better than what you would do normally. However, from a physiological perspective, fasting is not anabolic. So people make a big deal about the fact that you get a rise in growth hormone when you're fasted. That is from a fuel mobilization standpoint. Growth hormone is not actually anabolic at all in the physiological range. And in fact, even when injected, it's not anabolic to muscle tissue. It's really only anabolic to connective tissue and retaining body water. So it's not anabolic. It's not as anabolic. Fasting, that is. And I did research during my PhD thesis where we looked at meal distribution. So we looked at either kind of having like 70% of your protein at one meal, dinner, and 15% in your other meals, versus kind of distributing that evenly over 3 meals. And we found that again, it was an animal study, but we found that at the end of that study, the animals that had the more evenly distributed protein intake had bigger muscles. Okay, so again, it's an animal study. How much do you want to put into it? That's fine. But we have found that most of the results from our lab got validated in human models. So if you ask me, do I think it's optimal for anabolism? No, I don't. But can you still build an impressive physique with intermittent fasting? Absolutely. Perhaps a kind of middle ground, if you like intermittent fasting but you want to be as big and strong as possible, is intermittent fast your carbohydrate and fat and evenly distribute your protein. People want to make a big deal out of protein, but the enzymes, kinases, and genes that get activated from a high protein diet are very similar actually to what get activated from a higher protein diet and from fasting. Okay, they're very similar. And so I think that you can still get a lot of the benefits of intermittent fasting, but have the added benefit of evenly distributing your protein intake eating that way. So instead of, maybe you just have like a couple protein shakes, every 4 hours until you break your fast, and then you eat your, normal protein as you would, but then you eat your whole carb and fats in that 8-hour period or 4-hour period or whatever you decide to do. So I think that might be a nice kind of compromise between what is traditionally done for intermittent fasting and what might be a little bit better for muscle mass and strength. At the end of the day, diet how you want, just don't be judgmental towards other people. And don't become a zealot, don't become a cult follower of one approach just from the simple fact that somebody who looks good does this, okay? And always question everything anybody says, even me. I have my own biases like anybody else. So, but yeah, at the end of the day, food should not be an ethical qualm. So that's a little side rant there, but I find that a lot of people, especially in the intermittent fasting or pro-organic or vegan or anti-GMO crowd, tend to be very evidence resistant and will be very judgmental towards other people. So actually there was a study done that showed that people who ate organic were more likely to essentially be assholes, be judgmental and self-righteous. So that doesn't mean organic food is causing them to be assholes. It means that there's an association there. So again, correlation, not necessarily causation. But all right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'm going to try and keep them coming.